You are standing in an airport. Thousands of people moving in every direction. Screens flashing destinations. Bodies carried by conveyor belts and escalators from gate to gate. You are about to cross an ocean in 8 hours. You will barely think about it. But here is the thing. The impulse that got you here, the need to leave, to cross, to find out what is on the other side, that did not start with a boarding pass. It started somewhere much older. Somewhere in a body like yours, but with no map, no compass, no guarantee of return. The real story of how humans traveled the world is not a story about technology. It is a story about something built so deep into your biology that you have never been able to turn it off. And it is far stranger than you have ever been told. About 70,000 years ago, a small group of humans, probably fewer than a few hundred individuals, walked out of Africa. Not in a caravan. Not with a plan. They moved the way all early humans moved. Slowly, seasonally, following food, following water, following nothing at all except a restlessness that had no name yet. What happened next is one of the most astonishing journeys any species has ever made. Within roughly 50,000 years, those people, your ancestors, had reached every continent on Earth except Antarctica. They crossed deserts. They crossed open ocean. They walked into the frozen edge of the Arctic. They did it without wheels, without written language, without metal tools. The question that should stop you cold is this: how? The short answer is that modern researchers are still piecing it together. But what they are finding keeps overturning the story we thought we knew. Start with the feet. For most of human prehistory, travel happened on foot. Not as a special event. As life. Anthropologist Herman Pontzer spent years studying the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, to understand what ancestral movement actually looked like. What he found surprised even him. Hadza men and women walk between 8 and 15 kilometers every single day, not as exercise, not as transportation in the modern sense, but simply as the texture of daily existence. Hunting, foraging, visiting, moving camp. When you project that across a lifetime and then across generations stretching back thousands of years, the distances become staggering. A group that moves 10 kilometers a day for a year covers ground that would take you 3 weeks to drive. Multiply that by 500 years. By 5,000. The math alone explains how a species could fill a planet without a single invention we would recognize as travel technology. But feet only carry you so far. They do not carry you across the open ocean. This is where the story gets genuinely strange. For decades, the mainstream view held that early humans crossed water only when they had to, when sea levels dropped and land bridges appeared. The idea was that our ancestors were essentially accidental seafarers, stumbling onto islands only when geography made it easy. Then the archaeology started to crack that story open. Excavations in Crete, an island that has been separated from mainland Europe for more than 5 million years, turned up stone tools dating back at least 130,000 years. That means some group of pre-modern humans, possibly Homo heidelbergensis or even an earlier species, built or found a vessel capable of crossing open Mediterranean water. No land bridge. No accident. A deliberate crossing of blue water. Researcher Thomas Strasser, who led the Crete excavations, described it as a complete rethinking of what early hominins were capable of. And it was not an isolated case. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, fossil remains of Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit humans, sit on an island that has never been connected to the mainland. Even during the ice ages, when sea levels were dramatically lower, Flores was surrounded by open water. Someone, something, crossed to reach it. We do not know how. We do not know with what. The evidence just says they got there. What you are beginning to see is that human movement was not passive. It was not the slow drift of a species blown from place to place by chance. It was active, repeated, and in many cases, it required solving problems that no human had ever solved before. Consider the crossing into the Americas. For a long time, the accepted model was simple. Humans walked from Siberia into Alaska across a land bridge called Beringia, sometime around 13,000 years ago, when the last ice age lowered sea levels enough to expose a wide corridor of land. They followed big game. They moved south through a gap in the ice sheets. They spread across 2 continents in a few thousand years. Clean, logical, sequential. Then the sites started appearing that did not fit. At Monte Verde in southern Chile, archaeologist Tom Dillahay uncovered evidence of human occupation dating back at least 14,500 years, already further south than the land bridge model could easily explain. Then a second layer at the same site suggested human presence as far back as 18,500 years, long before the ice-free corridor even opened. More recently, contested footprints in New Mexico have been dated to as far back as 23,000 years ago. If those dates hold, humans were in the Americas thousands of years before they were supposed to arrive. The emerging alternative is the Kelp Highway hypothesis. Researcher John Erlandson and others have proposed that early humans, already skilled coastal foragers, traveled not through the interior but along the Pacific coastline, moving from one productive marine habitat to the next, using watercraft to island hop and skip across stretches of open water the same way they had been doing for tens of thousands of years in the Pacific. The coastline itself was their road. Fish, shellfish, marine mammals, the food was there year-round. The route was there. And the people, it turns out, had already been living along coastlines and using boats long before anyone once believed. But travel is not only about the body moving through space. It is also about what happens inside the brain while it moves. Researchers studying the genetics of migratory behavior have found something remarkable. There is a cluster of dopamine-related gene variants, sometimes grouped under the informal label the wanderer gene or DRD4-7R, that appears at higher rates in populations with a history of long-distance migration. The variant has been linked to novelty-seeking, restlessness, and risk tolerance. In hunter-gatherer societies and historically nomadic populations, its frequency is significantly elevated compared to settled agricultural communities. Geneticist Chuanxing Chen and colleagues first explored this pattern in the mid-1990s, and subsequent research has added complexity without removing the basic signal. The human genome carries traces of a drive to move. This does not mean any individual is destined to travel or stay. It means that across deep time the humans who moved, who crossed, who followed the horizon, who got in whatever vessel they had built and paddled toward the unknown, were not behaving irrationally. They were expressing something their biology had quietly selected for, because in the world those humans lived in, moving was often survival. Think about what navigation actually looked like before instruments. You are somewhere on the open ocean. No landmarks. The sun is your clock. The stars are your map. The swell patterns beneath your hull tell you which direction the deep ocean lies. Polynesian navigators, among the most extraordinary travelers in human history, developed a system called wayfinding that incorporated star paths, wave pillar patterns, wind direction, cloud formation over islands, and even the behavior of birds and fish. Researcher David Lewis, who sailed traditional Pacific routes in the 1970s alongside master navigators, documented a level of environmental reading that bordered on the incomprehensible to the Western scientific tradition. These navigators held a living map of the Pacific inside their minds. They passed it from teacher to student across generations without a single written word. The Polynesians reached Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand, the three corners of the Polynesian Triangle, in double-hulled canoes, navigating by knowledge. Not by accident. Not by luck. By a form of intelligence so highly tuned to movement and environment that modern GPS navigation looks almost crude by comparison. And this is the thing your brain was never quite taught to sit with. The humans who traveled this world were not primitive. They were not stumbling forward in the dark. They were operating at the absolute peak of what their minds could do, using every sense, every inherited piece of knowledge, every lesson encoded in story and song and ritual to move safely across a world with no safety net. The same brain that calculates your baggage allowance and checks the departure board is the direct descendant of a brain that could read an ocean, that could feel the rotation of a star system and use it to aim a wooden boat at an island it had never seen, that could track a herd across 500 kilometers of open grassland and return home in the dark. You have never had to do any of that. But the circuitry is still there. Next time you feel that pull, the one that makes you want to leave to go to see what is over the next ridge or across the water, understand that you are not being impractical. You are not being restless in some modern neurotic sense. You are running code that is 70,000 years old. Code that once walked out of Africa and did not stop until it had touched every shore on Earth. The airport you are standing in is just the latest version of that first step out of the dark. The same step. The same pull. The same species. Still moving.